Welcome into episode 245 of the Sources Say podcast, your go-to Kentucky basketball and recruiting podcast on the growing KSR Podcast Network. Sources Say is, as always, presented by our good friends at Justice Dental. Stressed about the big game? Take advantage of their special offer for KSR listeners and protect your teeth from clenching and grinding for a limited time. They are offering 20% off bite guards and discounted therapeutic Dysport injections. Click the link in our show notes to schedule your free consultation. Offer ends April 4th. I'm your host, Jack Pilgrim of Kentucky Sports Radio. Very happy to be joined once again by Shawn Smith of Go Big Blue Country. Shawn, how the heck are you?
Oh, sorry, my mic was muted. I am fantastic, Jack Pilgrim. How are you?
Well, I'm a little disappointed because this is the first show that we've gotten to do since previewing the SEC tournament. We were supposed to have a whole weekend of a lot of fun down in Nashville, live shows in front of fans and listeners, and unfortunately Kentucky was one and done down in the quarterfinals, losing to Vanderbilt in basically the exact same script as the first round matchup or the last matchup on senior night. Basically everything that we talked about on that pregame show about what could not happen ended up happening. So it is what it is. We're back home. Kentucky does not advance. They get sent home in the first round. Alabama goes on to win the SEC championship. And now here we are. Selection Sunday has come and gone, and we now have a path to whatever that's going to be for Kentucky. We at least have the path of what it will take for Kentucky to go on a run in the NCAA tournament. Kentucky will take on Providence, 11-seed Providence, on Friday night, 7:10 p.m. In Greensboro. I know you just got approved for it. I got approved for it. We're very, very excited to go down there where, Shawn, hopefully we can stay longer than a single night.
Yeah, and going back to the Vandy thing and the show we had, the only two things that I got correct that day were Vandy was a desperate team and Jacob Toppin would play well. Those were the only two things that I think that I said out of that 45 minutes that even kind of came to fruition and stood true. But you're right. It's put that behind us now. That does not matter. It's NCAA tournament time now. Kentucky's a 6 seed. We were wondering if they would fall to a 7 or possibly even an 8, given the way that they exited the SEC tournament. Texas A&M gets a 7, who won 17 league games and finished ahead of Kentucky and got to the SEC tournament final. So I have no idea what the committee did with seeding for a lot of these teams. But honestly, I like Kentucky's draw. I like where they're at. They do this stuff intentionally, though. Maybe Kentucky gets a 6 to match them up with Bryce Hopkins and Providence. And Jack, I think you'll agree with me on this. This is probably the most pressure-packed NCAA tournament John Calipari has entered as the head coach at Kentucky. Just with the pressure on him, the pressure on the program to win a tournament game, to make a run, something that's not happened for a long time. I don't know what a loss to a former player would do, but it would send people probably even to more of a downward spiral than what they have been in recent years. So there is a ton of attention and a ton of pressure on this program this week, but Kentucky has an excellent opportunity to get a win.
Yeah, as much as the NCAA selection committee says they don't factor in things like that, we don't look at storylines, we don't look at narratives, we don't look at potential TV draws and why it would be a better, CBS versus True TV. Come on now. Kentucky versus Bryce Hopkins, a dude that didn't make it at Kentucky, only averaged 6 minutes a game, frustrated, didn't play in the opening round of the NCAA tournament last year against St. Peter's, now has a chance to beat Kentucky as the premier player for Providence in the opening round to send Kentucky home again in the opening round. Come on, we're not gullible. We know this is exactly how the NCAA drew it up. And oddly enough, I think this is what Kentucky needed. I think they needed something to hang on to, something to kind of – I love the reaction that Jacob Toppin had when the draw was announced. I love that he stood up and immediately clapped and was like, woo, B-Hop, let's go. Chin Coleman got excited because if it were St. Peter's, if it were another kind of no-name program that they didn't have any emotional tie to it or whatever, and it sucks that the team needs to have that, but I do think that this is a game that they're going to be up for, and I'm glad that they now have that edge. There's no reason that Kentucky can't come out without an edge going against a dude that said that he felt like a robot playing for John Calipari. I mean, the stories write themselves, and to Kentucky's credit, I think it's going to help rather than hurt.
I agree with you. And once the tournament field had been announced and what it was, and we were watching the West, right? Because we thought that was a possible landing spot for Kentucky, was an opening weekend in Sacramento, and then probably staying West and playing in Vegas. But then you saw the committee kind of shifting things, and they sent Kansas to that region. And then I was like, okay, like where Kentucky's seated here, I don't know. Like, did they get the East? And then when you got it and you saw that Providence wasn't off the board yet, I kind of was like, this has the makings of a 6-11 matchup for Kentucky. And I'm with you. This has been a team that needs that chip on its shoulder this season to play well. And that's not a thing that you want to have going into the postseason. It's not a recipe for success to win 6 straight. But if it jump starts that momentum again, that's what it might take. And this might be the one that they learn from, right? Like you get it started and your hope is that they don't just let it go the other direction. You hope that they continue that momentum, playing Providence, playing a former player. One could say that Bryce knows everything Kentucky's going to do. Well, on the other side, Kentucky knows everything about Bryce Hopkins and what his struggles are, what his strengths are. These guys know these battles. Jacob Toppin versus Bryce Hopkins in practice. We know all about those battles a year ago. Kentucky, there's, and I talked about pressure leading up to this and it being on Kentucky's program. I could also see this where Bryce puts way too much into this and almost plays Providence out of a win by trying to do too much. So there's equal amount of pressure on him individually as there probably is on Kentucky to win this game. So this is going to be a battle of who maybe is poised and plays within themselves even more. And I think it's easier for Kentucky than it is for the individual player to do it in that stage.
And I guess it's only fair to go back in time a little bit and talk about how we got to this point and how kind of this internal rivalry kind of stemmed from. And we had said on this show from the very beginning that in December, I mean, hadn't even gotten to the spring semester yet of last year where Bryce Hopkins had his bags packed and made the decision that he was going to be gone no matter what. It was a very rocky start to his time at Kentucky because I think John Calipari made it very clear you need to cut weight. You're not working hard enough in practice. And if you're going to continue at the rate that you're going right now, you will never play for me at Kentucky. I mean, that's fact. Like, that's exactly how his time at Kentucky started and the tone that was set there. And rather than kind of using that as a motivating tool, as a, personal, all right, well, they're doubting me and my ability to get in shape and be the, live up to the expectation that I know I can be, the potential that I have. He basically said, well, I'd rather go somewhere else where somebody else can coddle me and help me be the player that I know that I am. It's just a different coaching style. He needed an Ed Cooley in his life that, would kind of be a little bit less rough around the edges and kind of ease him into the starring role that he ended up having. And to their credit, it ended up being a perfect match. He probably should have gone to Providence to begin with. That was the runner up in his recruitment to start with. And it ended up being, he wanted to be a Kentucky basketball player. And that's why he ended up signing with Kentucky. He wanted to play for a Hall of Fame coach and all that, when really coaching style and personality fit matched perfectly with Providence. He should have been there the whole time. And now I agree, Sean. I think that this is a chance for him to show that he was good enough, that he was that he's going to put that weight on his shoulders to be that guy that he knew he could be. And I think it's going to backfire. I know the FT said at the very top, I'll open the chat with a take. B-Hop is either going to drop 30 on us or he will go 2 for 18 and single-handedly throw the game. I think there's a very good chance it's going to be the latter. And it's interesting, Sean, that Ed Cooley even said in his interview with CBS Sports after the fact, said that there's a chance that he's going to throw a ball off the side of the backboard because he's so nervous and he's so amped up. I don't see him settling in throughout a game, a 40-minute game, and just magically becoming the player that team needs to kind of anchor their chances and help them win down the stretch. So I think that this could backfire, and we could see a Bryce Hopkins super inefficient. He's only had one game above 50% shooting since February. So I think this could actually backfire, or I think since January, actually. So I think this could potentially backfire, Sean.
I think so too. And I just think that the pressure created by this matchup, and this is one of those matchups that we talk about where the committee does it, to me, intentionally. Like, is Texas A&M misseeded to be a 7 seed just because there's a possible matchup with Texas in the second round as a 7 and a 2? It's like Kentucky in 2016 when we thought that they were misseeded and they matched up with Indiana in the first round. Like we always know, like if Kentucky is a 1 or a 2 and there's a Northern Kentucky or an Eastern Kentucky, they're going to draw who in the first round. Like there's always scenarios and those matchups that the committee looks to intentionally, and this is one of those. And it's not as much an unfair matchup as it is to Kentucky as it is to Bryce Hopkins. And I think that just looking at it, I think all the more pressure is on the individual player. Kentucky as a team can do this together, but Bryce is going to probably for a moment feel like it's him against the world and him against Kentucky. And you saw the reaction last night when he learned that it was Kentucky. Like he was fired up and excited about it. Not only his reaction, everyone in that room was doing what? They were finding Bryce Hopkins and pointing to him, fist bumping him, hugging him, because then you kind of knew, okay, this is a personal matchup for him. But Kentucky, on the other hand, is like, B-Hop, like we're getting to play against B-Hop. And I think there's going to be some excitement on both sides. It creates an interesting storyline. It's a Providence team that is trending in the opposite direction from what their actual numbers are and metrics in KenPom. Like they're an efficient offensive team over the course of the season. I think they sit 14th in adjusted offense and 108th in adjusted defense. But that defensive number in like the last 10 games is like 200th. And the offensive numbers dipped as well. Those are the stats that you pay attention to. You do not go to the overall spectrum in the season here. You look at the latest sample is this is a team that's not playing good basketball entering the postseason. Minus 2 losses to Vandy, Kentucky has been playing good basketball entering the postseason. It's going to be a similar matchup to Vandy where Providence is going to go small and try to drive the ball on you. But I think Kentucky's built to have more success against this Providence team than they were against Vandy in the SEC tournament. And let's face it too. Calipari said this Friday night in the postgame. You get to get out and away from the teams that know you best. And this team, sure, there's film on them. Providence is going to watch plenty of film on Kentucky. They probably already started that. But they haven't gone up against Kentucky. They haven't seen Kentucky in person. And it's just different. And there's different elements to it when you have 3 times and you have it once.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Providence team that just lost. That we talk about Kentucky's senior day struggles and the how disappointing that was to lose to Vanderbilt in a close matchup. Arguably the hottest team in the SEC. Losing that one sucked. But you look at Providence's senior day; they lost 82-58 to a Seton Hall team that it's Seton Hall. Like they're okay, but that was a game that kind of set the tone going into their postseason. They lost early in the Big East tournament, just like Kentucky did. They've lost 8 of their last 15, though 3 straight to close out the year. So this is, like you said, Kentucky outside of the bad matchups, and the Vanderbilt games are what they are. But this is a Providence team that is actively playing bad basketball going into March, and I just do think it's a recipe for failure for them, considering they've already. Bryce's usage has always been very high for this team as is. And for them to kind of know that he is their saving grace, well, Kentucky more than all of us, you fix it. You get us to the opening round. And there's a chat in the comment section that I want to bring up too. Says last night Ed Cooley refused to deny the rumors of him leaving for Georgetown. That can't be sitting right with the players. That's one that I'm keeping a close eye on because his name continues to be attached to that Georgetown job. All the high-profile John Rothsteins and Goodmans, they continue to bring up Ed Cooley's name alongside the Georgetown job. All of these kind of storylines on their end is putting so much more pressure on them than it's kind of taking away the pressure of Kentucky. St. Peter's hasn't won a tournament game since in X number of years, going down the list of those pressure-filled things. It's almost putting the pressure now on Providence, which I think is a best-case scenario for this Kentucky team.
I absolutely agree with you 100%. And two, another thing here, and okay, I thought you froze for a second. I was like, maybe we lost you. But another thing, too, that I look at is how often do you have an NCAA tournament in a location in Greensboro where there's no Duke and there's no North Carolina? North Carolina didn't make the tournament and then declined the NIT. Duke gets sent to Orlando. Kentucky fans, as a 6 seed playing in Greensboro, we were planning to go to Albany when we were sitting in Nashville the other night when they lost. I looked at you and I said, well, we're either going to Albany, we're going to Sacramento, we're going to Des Moines, we're going somewhere that's not convenient. Greensboro's pretty convenient for Kentucky fans. And for the most part, out of all the schools that are going to be there, Kentucky fans will dominate the building when it comes to attendance. And we know that that's the case wherever they're at. If they're in Boise, there's going to be a lot of Kentucky fans. But more so when you don't have Carolina and you don't have Duke. And I also wonder, will there be some Carolina and Duke fans show up just to attend? Probably because at one point they maybe thought that those teams are going to be there. But I think that is another factor. Like they're not going to have to compete for those ticket sales in those seats, and not having one of those big programs there in their own backyard. You don't see that often. I'd like to remember a tournament where Greensboro was a location that they didn't have those teams in the building. Like I'm sure when the season started, both teams probably thought Duke and Carolina both would get Greensboro if they were top 3, top 4 seeds. And then you and I were talking Tennessee would be Greensboro, and they get sent to Orlando. So Kentucky, honestly, I think got a pretty good draw, not just with matchups, but I think they got a pretty good draw with location and staying on the East Coast as well.
Yeah, and just big picture with the draw, I think it's a lot of name brand programs, and I think that's why some of the fans that just looked at the bracket on the surface are going, oh no, Tennessee and Michigan State and Duke and even Marquette's been playing well. I think on the surface level, it looks scarier than the actual matchups themselves. There's not a single matchup in Kentucky, assuming chalk holds, that that really scares me. I mean, I do think that probably the toughest on paper matchup, just from an analytical standpoint, is Providence. And if you get past them, I like Kentucky's chances against Kansas State, a defensive-minded team. Keontae Johnson, they have a history together. Kentucky, at least knows him and familiar with his game. Kind of similar situation with Bryce, just from a familiarity standpoint. And then, from there, if you can get past the opening weekend, if you can get to that Sweet 16, then at that point you get Marquette, who has been playing well, but they're beatable. They've definitely not shown that they're this world-beating program. Shaka Smart has them in tremendous shape, but still, it's not a team that has me shivering in my boots. And then if you get to the Elite Eight, then you got Purdue, which they are who they are. Zach Edey versus Oscar Sheboy, all eyes on them. Or maybe Duke surprises people and makes a run. And Elite Eight in New York City, Madison Square Garden against Duke, I think that'd be a lot of fun. But a lot of name brand programs that I think are scarier on paper than they are from an actual on-court perspective.
Well, and when you get into analytics, metrics, and we dive into Ken Pom, adjusted offensive efficiency, adjusted defensive efficiency, and we're going to, let's just say Kentucky wins the first round matchup against Providence, and let's say chalk holds and they play K-State. Kansas State is the team that Kentucky has had success against this season. The team that isn't super efficient offensively, but they're there in those numbers defensively. K-State right now is 52nd in offensive efficiency in Ken Pom and 19th in defensive efficiency. Those are the teams that Kentucky's beaten in its recent success it's had to close the year. The teams that don't score at a high clip, but they defend at a high level. Same thing can be said when you look at Marquette. This is why when you mentioned Marquette, you mentioned Purdue or those teams that Kentucky could, run into a path there. Marquette is 8th in offensive efficiency. Purdue 7th in offensive efficiency. You throw out Duke 42nd in offensive efficiency. Those teams that are efficient offensively, those are the teams that Kentucky has struggled to beat. Vandy, not a good defensive team, but they spread Kentucky out. Kentucky could not contain the basketball. Oscar not good in pick and roll. They hit open threes. Kentucky has to defend at a capable clip. To me, it doesn't have to be an elite clip. It just has to be a capable clip. You have to get 3 stops in a row. Remember I told you the other night, Kentucky's going to get back in this game if they can get 3 stops in a row. Well, they end up getting 4 out of 5 possessions, stops, 0 baskets, because they couldn't score the ball themselves in that moment. And that's where I'm coming from. Like I worry more about other teams that can score the ball too with Kentucky, because I do have concerns about Kentucky's defense. But Providence is a team that struggles to defend significantly worse than Kentucky does. So you got to put up points.
I do want to address that elephant in the room because I love how in our pregame show we talked about the emphasis on offense. And like, man,
it's still there though.
I take the offensive efficiency any day over the defensive efficiency. We don't really need to worry about defense right now. It is what it is. I'd rather take a team that's firing on all cylinders offensively, but still sputtering a little bit defensively. And then sure enough, opening round of the SEC tournament, that's what gets them sent home. But it is what it is. I just think it's funny.
But is it?
Go figure.
Is it what got them sent home, though? Or was it the fact that they didn't hit free throws and they missed the front end of 1-and-1s? Is it the fact that I thought there were some really odd time substitutions and momentum killers from John Calipari himself that I thought that really kind of deflated what Kentucky was doing? There were some – I think the thing that really threw me the most was I thought Cal and Kentucky would have looked at that game and said, we need to do something different than what we did the week before. And they didn't. They went with the same lineups. They went with the same, like when Lance goes in there alongside Oscar, I'm like, what are you doing? And then you take people out when there's a hot stretch of play. Like if after they gone on that run and put them up 14-4, I watched that clip today on Twitter where Reeves hits the back-to-back threes, the roof was about to blow off. And then they come out and there was no energy. Like Vandy regains the momentum after the timeout due to some lineup changes and some things there. And I was like, what are we doing? Like somebody would have to physically look at me and say, I can't play for me to switch a lineup up after that moment. And then they had a 9-minute stretch without a whistle late in the first half where they had 3 dudes. Damian Collins sat at the table from the 9-minute mark to the 2-minute mark waiting to check in. And I just think that there were just some things there that just kind of rhythm got thrown off, and Kentucky ended the first half poorly, which is another thing we did talk about on the pregame show. They needed they needed to close the first half on a high note, and they needed to open the second half on a positive note, and they did neither one of those two. But I still stand by what I said. Offensive efficiency that's going to be the teams that are in the Final Four. The teams that can score points and put points up at a high clip are going to be the teams that are going to get to that Final Four in that final weekend. You just have to be a capable defensive team, and you can't have breakdown after breakdown after breakdown. Here's why. You got to do one thing. You've got to guard the basketball. That's what Kentucky could not do. They could not guard the basketball. They couldn't stop Vandy in transition. If they can contain the basketball, then they can make some plays defensively with their length. But if you're chasing and chasing and chasing, and Oscar Tshiebwe is not a rim protector, then you're asking for trouble. Guard the basketball. You don't have to defend at a top 10 clip. Guard the basketball, and I think it fixes a lot of the defensive issues, but Kentucky could not contain it.
I guess, how much do you think Kaysen being at less than 100% and the lack of depth that Kentucky has right now in the backcourt, how much do you think that impacted the on-court or the on-ball defense that kind of led to some of the, breakaway opportunities for Vandy and kind of broke things open for them in that area? And how much are you kind of zeroing in on that going into the NCAA tournament, knowing what we just talked with John Calipari about with Sahvir Wheeler coming back, with how much back to full strength Casey Wallace is, CJ Frederick inching closer back, and the just general health status of this team?
Obviously I have my concerns about rhythm and what's established, but this is why I thought it was such an important thing to play Kaysen the amount of minutes they did against Vandy, because you saw that he wasn't in sync with himself, right? He wasn't in sync with the flow of the game and things like that. He actually came up. I think he took a knee to a knee, if I'm not mistaken, on a play there in the second half. That's what it looked like happened. So we kind of held our breath when he walked off to the bench there for a brief moment, and then he returned to the game for the final stretch. So I think playing him the minutes that they did, it was more important to do it in that moment than to have to do it on Friday. So, like, if, Sahvir Wheeler is able and returns and able to give it a go, like, how many minutes does he play? Like, I don't think it's going to be a lot. I think it's kind of an as-needed thing. And then CJ Frederick, we know that he's banged up, and there's nothing really that he can do about his injury besides just not play, and that's not even an option at this point. So they're banged up. They're probably never going to be 100% the rest of the way. That's just part of it. Like, what team in college basketball probably is 100% at this point in the season? Somebody's got some nagging injury. But I think the thing that I take away from Vandy is I didn't really get anything answered. And I'm this guy that I want close games this time of year. Not now. Like, now you're in the NCAA tournament, close games are going to kill me. Like, close games are going to probably put us all a couple of years off our lives. But I wanted the close game against Vandy because I wanted to see what Kentucky would do offensively. Where would they go to? And this is where I'm afraid is going to be the downfall. I am so concerned that in this tournament, Kentucky is going to get into a tight game, and they're going to try to just slow it down and post Oscar. And you saw what happened in crunch time the other night when they tried to post. Oscar's not a good passer. So one time they didn't get a basket. The next time he threw the ball away. I get going to him if there's an advantage at times, but I kind of feel like Cal kind of looks at this, goes, oh, just get it to him 6 or 7 feet from the basket. Something good's going to happen. No, get in that middle ball screen with Antonio Reeves or Cason Wallace. Get a guard going downhill and let Oscar do what he does best, which is live off the offensive glass, running downhill out of a ball screen, and then have these shooters, whether it be Wallace or whoever, spot up, ready to knock down shots. Jacob Toppin's a capable shooter right now too, knocking down shots. So I don't think we got anything answered when it comes to how Kentucky's going to operate in a tight game, needing a bucket down 4 or needing a bucket up 4 in the final 4 or 5 minutes of the game. And I thought that was the most concerning thing for me, is I still don't know what they're going to do and what their identity is to close out games when it's win or go home.
Yeah, and John P. Ryan says Cason has to play better. I agree. And I didn't know necessarily what I was expecting with him. I think coming back, just throwing himself back in the fire, was he going to be sharp offensively? We talked about Antonio Reeves, being more of an on-ball presence, and maybe that kind of being a better complementary piece, with Cason being more off-ball, having better catch-and-shoot opportunities, whatever the case was. And we didn't see a whole lot of that. We just kind of saw a reset of what it was 2 weeks before. So that was concerning. And the fact that he played 37 minutes, added in another nick to his injury report that already had a dinged up ankle while playing 37 minutes, I thought that was kind of a worst case. And getting the loss, we talked about kind of Kentucky being able to have its cake and eating it too at Arkansas, where you win without Cason. This was the exact opposite. I said this on the reaction show last night. Kentucky got its cake and smacked himself in the face with it, with Cason playing 37 minutes and losing the game in the opening round of the SEC tournament.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the comment right there, stops only help if you score. That's what I was getting at a moment ago. I looked at you and Tyler the other night, and I said Kentucky will make a run right here if they can get 3 stops in a row. The game was 59-52. Kentucky gets 3 stops in a row, and you know what the score was at the end of those 3 stops? 59-52. And then they got another stop, and they didn't get a basket. One, I think they missed free throws a couple of possessions, and I think they turned it over another one and then missed I think they missed a shot inside of 10 feet. If you're getting stops, you have to get baskets on the other end, especially if you're trying to mount a comeback. This is a team that I don't think is built to play from behind. It's not at any point. Like if they get into a game here in this tournament and they're down 9 or 10 in the first half, you're going to see me start to kind of have some doubts about whether or not we're going home and the season's over, and me and you transition to who's going to be back and who's leaving and what's it going to look like and what's the temperature and the program around John Calipari. I don't want to have those conversations right now. Those are very uncomfortable and difficult conversations to have for a month before the tournament even gets wrapped up. So I want to stay away from that. But I think that's kind of what I'm looking at with this is a team that needs to get off to a fast start, or at least be able to trade baskets with teams until they can start stringing some stops together. But they have to play with the lead as much as possible, because I think they're significantly better when they play with the lead. And I mean, that goes for any team. But I think that when they're playing, like at Arkansas, they built a lead and they never gave it up. And I thought that was the most impressive thing about that win. Tennessee at Rupp, they built a lead, never gave it up. The playing from behind thing, I just think it's difficult. And there, has Kentucky won a single close game this year? When it gets down to having to execute, and it's a basket or 2 away, whether you have the lead or you don't, I still have questions about this team entering the final stretch of the season. That is my biggest concern. We usually get those questions answered in the regular season, and we see something that gives us hope. That is my one thing. If Kentucky's playing with a deficit, entering the under 8 timeout in the second half, or entering the under 4, I'm going to have some doubts about whether or not they can get that win. If they have the lead, I think they're better suited to play that way. But they got to shoot free throws better too, regardless of whether they're leading or they're not leading. That's a momentum killer.
John Calipari brought up the possibility of Sahvir Wheeler making his return to Kentucky. Said that he will have some leeway this week. He kind of set some practice guidelines of, if you're going to play in the NCAA tournament, you have to play X number of days of practice to be eligible, in my coaching book, which I thought was kind of interesting, referring to Jacob Toppin, Cason Wallace, CJ Frederick, confirmed after the kind of weird back and forth that we got with Jacob Toppin that he actually did have an injury and that it wasn't a hamstring issue. And I liked the response that Cal had there, but I also like the maturity that Jacob Toppin showed where he, immediately was just like, I'm not injured. I'm cool. No big deal. But Cal going out of his way to be like, yeah, he missed 4 days of practice with a hamstring issue. That's a pretty big deal. But the idea of Sahvir being such a crapshoot, just having no idea what he's like after missing him for an entire month, how does that play into Kentucky? How much does he play? How much does he need to play? How much does he need to sit on the bench? What impact can he make? I think, weirdly enough, that's going to be one of the biggest storylines of this week, potentially. But I guess as we inch closer to it, seeing when he practices and the extent of it.
I'll tell you this. If it's a close game, he doesn't play. He don't play. I just don't see it because if he does play, let's think about this. Let's say that he's practiced and he's able to give it a go on Friday, and Cal throws him in there, and he doesn't play well. What's going to be said post game? What's going to be said? Think about it.
All of the bad things that we heard for 6 months leading up to the season about roles and how much he needs to play. If he plays a significant role and struggles, all of those 6 months of controversial comments will be packed in to a 24-hour span that it's going to be loud. And it's very loud.
Yep. And it sets the kid up for criticism. It sets Cal up for criticism. The perfect thing would be if you're in a comfortable spot and you've got a lead and you need him. Like, needing it and forcing it are two entirely different things. If you need him, you got to go to him. If you're forcing it just to force it, that's not a John Calipari thing to me. John Calipari, to me, doesn't really, when it gets to this type of year, it wouldn't shock me if he plays 5 dudes Friday if he can get away with it and play them 37, 38 minutes each. And if it goes to overtime, somehow somebody ends up playing 46 minutes and they add an extra minute. I don't know. Like, that's the type of John Calipari I know when it gets down to this time of year. I think you're going to see primarily 6 dudes play, but I think those 5 that start are going to be up in the 34s and 35s. I just don't see this thing. If it's a close game, I think Cal's going to roll with the starting 5. And not only Cal, I think you're going to see the same approach from Providence. This is going to be a starting lineup heavy game from both teams. And whichever group's the best and whichever group gets off to a better start and sustains that success for 40 minutes. Look, when you get to this time of year, the feelings are different. The emotions are different. Because you're going home if you're not playing well. When you play in Nashville and Vandy's going on a run, you're like, we still got next week. Not anymore. You've got the next 30 minutes if you're lucky. And you better figure it out to get to the second round and get to Sunday. And I think a lot of times the first game of this tournament, then the seed that Kentucky's in, I feel like the first game's probably the hardest. If you're a higher seed, it's usually the second game that's the hardest. It's that second round matchup against an 8 or 9 if you're a 1. Like, how many of those do you see kind of give some difficulty for 1 seeds? So I think this could be Kentucky's toughest game of the weekend, because I like them against Kansas State if chalk holds and they advance there. So I think if you win game 1, I think Kentucky has a chance to survive and get to New York City. If they get to that point in the season, all bets are off. You're playing basketball at that point, and you got a chance to play your way into a Final Four. Win game 1. That's the thing that they've not been able to do since that tourney win against Houston. They've not won a tournament game. Get that monkey off your back. Let the fans celebrate for 36 hours, and let's have some fun this weekend.
Yeah, I agree. And I believe Steven has the clip rolled from John Calipari talking about Jacob Toppin. Let's roll that real quick.
So those 2. Last week, we had 4 guys not practice Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, including Jacob, who had a hamstring. And so they did not practice, the 4 of those guys. And again, this week I told them, you'll either practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or you will not start. And you will come off the bench if you're a starter. And if you're on the bench, you're going to be deeper on the bench. When you're just doing scripting and you're not competing, it takes an edge away. We have to compete before we go in. So those are just some things. And someone said, Jacob said he wasn't hurt. Well, Jacob knows not to make an excuse when someone beats us. He knows we give them all the credit. We don't take away from their win, and we weren't going to, and that's why he said what he said. But like I said, we've got to make some adjustments in how we're preparing.
So, and I like that answer from Cal, and I do appreciate that he kind of didn't throw Jacob under the bus and gave him credit for being mature in that, but also kind of provided some clarity, I think, because it is understandable. Jacob played his butt off. I thought he was I thought he was absolutely terrific against Vanderbilt. Responded the way we talked about on the show, saying, he took so much blame for that loss on senior night and said, this was my fault completely. I need to be better. I was selfish, putting so much on his chest and putting on his shoulders. And he responded in such a way that, he was attacking the basket, the way he attacked the glass and scored at will. Played as that versatile face-up guy that we kind of knew he could be. He stepped up in that way, and was curious your thoughts on knowing the matchup against Bryce, knowing it's going to be a 4 versus 4 battle, and the importance of that head-to-head battle. I'm excited for Jacob and to see his response to this matchup in particular. Everything kind of building up to this moment for Jacob. I think I feel really good about a dude that has needed this type of buildup versus a guy with a lot of pressure on his shoulders and Bryce to live up to his expectation on his team.
And this is the case where I look at this matchup too, and I think that Bryce has to do more for Providence than Jacob has to do for Kentucky. For Providence to win this matchup and beat Kentucky, I think Bryce has to do a heck of a lot more. Where Jacob, if his sole focus in this game is to defend and rebound, and then make those energy plays like he did against Vandy the other night. Like Jacob's stat line the other night was energy and effort. That's how he got to those numbers. That second effort at the rim and getting some garbage baskets and tip ins and staying active. So I think that matchup alone, I think Jacob has more help in it, because I could also see, like, could you see a Chris Livingston maybe matched up a possession or two or here or there? Like, could you see Kentucky go that way if Jacob's not in the game?
6'6". Yeah, they're both 6'6", 230-pound forwards.
Yep, I think that you could see. I think Kentucky has some more, options there for Bryce than maybe Bryce needs to be very, very good for Providence to win this game. Jacob doesn't have to go get 20 and 10 for Kentucky to win this game. Jacob just has to, if that's his one job, is to slow down Bryce Hopkins. Let Oscar Sheba go get his stat line. Maybe Cason Wallace is getting more offensively. Antonio Reeves knocks down open shots. Like, Kentucky's got some options to survive this game. But the one thing there, though, that Cal did say, you really think if somebody doesn't practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, do you think that he's not going to start Jacob Toppin on Friday night? Because if Jacob didn't do that thing, then he went and got 20 and 10 or whatever in a double-double the other night by not practicing for a few days. So, I mean, did we really lose the aggression and everything there? Because I thought that Jacob Toppin was the most aggressive player on the floor. And if he didn't practice or was hampered by a hamstring injury, I couldn't tell. Like, I thought he looked 100%, and I thought he was giving it. He played like a guy that knew what time of year it is. Mm-hmm. And that's what you need. You need guys that know what time of year it is. I've not known what time it is for 48 hours now since the clocks moved forward. But you know what I mean? Like, they know that it's March Madness, and they know that it's do or die. And there's guys on this team that felt what they felt last year when they lost to St. Peter's, and I guarantee you they don't want to feel that again.
I agree. Robert Peterson says, you live off false hope. You don't even yell the truth. Who is going to stop Hopkins with no shot blocker and a post player with no post moves? Providence is going to play 2-3 zone. Robert, who is going to guard Oscar Shibwe? That's the thing that's kind of frustrated me and made me laugh with Kentucky fans on social media. As soon as this announcement was drawn, well, Bryce is going for 35 points, and Kentucky might as well pack their bags for one night because they ain't winning that game. It's like they're playing in the Big East. This is a team that, yes, on paper they look a lot kind of like Vanderbilt and a team that struggle that cause Kentucky to struggle in that way. They're going to play a 3-guard lineup, quick guards, small ball, all the kind of trigger word, buzzword things that we've seen with this Kentucky team struggle against Vanderbilt. So I understand the on paper struggles, but this is still SEC versus Big East. There's a reason why Bryce was able to go in playing 34 minutes, admittedly, and he's been terrific. This isn't even a slight at him, but if he played 34 minutes a game at Kentucky, he was not going for 16 and 8 a game. And that's my argument. The reason why he's been as productive as he's been is because he's been a high usage player that has fit in the Big East. He is an Ed Cooley player to a T.
Yep.
Now he's going back up against Kentucky guys that he did okay with in practice, and he started out really strong when he first got on campus. I remember he was the hottest name. Oh, he's going to be one of Kentucky's best players, all that last summer. But that tailed off quite a bit because when push came to shove, it was the SEC athletes that kind of separated themselves against a guy that he's a Big East player. He is a physical, small ball for Big East talent that thrives under, like him going to play for Ed Cooley was a perfect fit for him. But how does that actually match up against a 6'10" guy like Jacob Toppin, as versatile as he is? Bryce is not an elite defender. How is he going to guard Jacob Toppin? Like we talk about how are we going to shut down Bryce? How is Bryce going to shut down all of Kentucky's pieces?
And the truth of this, there's probably a middle ground here somewhere where we're probably talking way too much about Bryce. Probably more so than what we should have. And I've made that mistake as a coach before, where I've talked about a player so much that they probably think it was LeBron James when we lined up to play him. So, you know what I mean? And I thought our buddy Brandon Ramsey made a really fair point on Twitter earlier today. I don't know if you saw his tweet, but he was talking about that, just a reminder, Kentucky went 26 and 8 last year with Bryce averaging 2.1 points and 6.5 minutes per game and not playing in the tournament, and beat some really good teams along the way. You're happy for Bryce. It's worked out for Bryce. That's what we wanted. Bryce is a good kid, and we wanted him to be successful. That's a recruitment that me and you were familiar with and talked a lot about when leading up to Kentucky and everything. So I think probably we knew we would talk a ton about it. It's a really good storyline because it's good for our jobs, because it gives us plenty of stories and interviews, not just leading up to the game, but after the game Friday night. But we probably talk too much about it. There's other things about this matchup that we need to talk about. And somebody mentioned Providence playing 2-3 zone, and Cal's not going to do this. I know he's not. You know how much I would love to see Kentucky mix in some zone, especially Friday night, just to kind of limit some of the dribble penetration that Kentucky struggled with. You don't have to live in it. I'm just saying, come out of a media timeout or something where you're defensively starting the possession and sit in a zone for a trip or two, just to change the rhythm and the flow of the game. If a team's knifing you and snaking you to death out of ball screen and things like that and getting to the rim, just go zone a couple of trips. And then maybe you go back man. Just if they could mix in 7, 8, 9, 10 possessions of zone, I think it would do wonders for this Kentucky team defensively, just because it's keeping the opposing bench off balance. And it kind of makes them think about it. And it gives teams something else to have to waste their time to prepare on. How many teams do you think prepared to run their zone offense in the walkthrough and the pregame leading up to Kentucky? No possessions?
Zero.
Yeah, just mix it up and throw it in there. Sprinkle it in here and there just to change something. Maybe that'd be the tweak. Mix in zone here or there. If you get 10 possessions of zone, it would change the flow of the game and maybe halt some runs and maybe jumpstart a run for Kentucky if they can mix it in. But Cal's not going to do it.
But why? I just don't get it. Very frustrating. As people,
you're annoyed too, right?
Unbelievably.
You want to see
it. People acted like this about Nick Smith, and he shot Arkansas out of the game. Exactly. I completely agree. Darkness. The reason Hopkins is on their team is he didn't want to compete for playing time at UK. I'm not afraid of him at all. Yeah, I completely agree. I am not.
This comes down.
I think this plays into Kentucky's favor.
This game comes down to one thing: can Kentucky guard the basketball? If they can contain the basketball, even 50% of what they couldn't against Vandy, Kentucky marches on to Sunday to play in the second round in the round of 32. If they don't guard the basketball, this is going to be a game that Kentucky could lose. especially if Providence hits if Providence shoots above their season average of 35% from the 3-point line and Kentucky struggles to guard the ball, Kentucky might be going home. But if they shoot their season average and Kentucky contains the dribble drive at a more successful clip than what they did in Nashville and to close the season, then I think Kentucky leaves this first-round matchup with a win and moves on to Sunday. It's that simple. And I think guarding the basketball is the primary adjustment Kentucky needs defensively right now. If you can't contain and guard the basketball, I don't care what your pick and roll coverage is. I don't care what you're doing behind those rotations and what you're doing, or if the team's shooting a high clip from 3-point line or what. Now, Vandy did hit some shots at the horn in the game at Rupp Arena and the game in Nashville that if you take the late three at the buzzer where the ball almost went over and back and then another one late in the clock, like those are 5 points right there that if you wipe out, it's a completely different game entering the final stretch than Jacob Toppin literally just missed a 3-point play that could have given Kentucky new life late. Like Kentucky didn't have things go in their favor, but that's where you've got to do the key attention to detail things. That way those things aren't like momentum killers and daggers in your season. You get to this point of the season and one thing is off and you're going home. So you have to lock in. It starts with guarding the basketball. If they can just adjust and guard the basketball at a better clip, I think this team's defensive numbers can climb, and I think their offensive efficiency will be there, and they'll be a team that can make a run.
Yeah, and I've said I think the physical tools have always been there, and I do think that I question how much Cason Wallace's hurt ankle impacted what I will be totally fair and admit that it was a very poor defensive outing for him individually. When he continues to get his feet wet and gets back to 100%, how much will that help the team's overall on-ball defense and just the defensive struggles that have been so clear in recent weeks? I also keeping a very close eye on the fact that Providence does not have a great bench. They're not a deep team at all. They will very top-heavy. Very balanced, top-heavy. Their entire starting five is very solid, but they do not have a lot of depth. This is a game that I kind of like to see Kentucky push the pace a little bit and try to wear them down, get Oscar some touches and wear them down physically while also getting the pace, setting the pace and the tempo and forcing them to their bench, which is admittedly weak. I like Kentucky's chances in that regard.
I do too. And I think I agree with you 100%. And this is a different tournament where you're not playing back-to-back days. Now, we know Kentucky only played the one day in Nashville, but when you don't play a ton of guys, you at least have a day off in between to prepare. And that helps. To me, another storyline to watch in this game is which team avoids foul trouble and where does that foul trouble hit?
Plays into the depth too.
Yeah. I think that plays in. If it hits in Kentucky's front court and they're without Oscar Tshiebwe, you know what's it do? Or if it hits in the backcourt, like when Antonio Reeves went out the other night, you kind of lost all hope that Kentucky could mount a rally and hit the shots that they needed to down the stretch. There's going to be foul trouble. Like, it wouldn't shock me if Bryce or Jacob is one of the two that gets hit with foul trouble, depending on because Providence is going to give the ball to Bryce early and force it to try to get him what? Try to get him going. They're probably going to attack Oscar Tshiebwe some early and try to get him out in foul trouble. We know with what we've seen on tape, it's going to be a lot of ball screen and right at attacking Oscar with that bounce getting downhill. And you're going to see it. They're going to try to do the exact same thing that Vandy did. And I think a lot of the more modernized coaches and stuff in college basketball, they've found a way to have success against Oscar Tshiebwe and attack him. And I think that the blueprint's there, that they're going to try to do the same thing. That's where I'm saying Kentucky has to contain the dribble drive and the basketball at a much higher clip. And if they can, I think some of these other defensive issues kind of take care of themselves. And then, look, Kentucky dominated the glass the other night. But it didn't matter. Vandy didn't miss a free throw, and they shot lights out from three, and then their 2-point field goal percentage was at a high number too. And Kentucky's was a low number in all three areas, from the field, from the 3-point line, from the free throw line. It was the perfect storm to lose a game, but they still had a chance to win the game down the stretch. They just could not get they got the stops they needed at times, but when they got those stops, they didn't get baskets on the other end. You can't waste those stops. You know, you call them kills if you get 3 stops in a row, because those are how you kill momentum and start momentum. Kentucky was just kill on both ends. They were killing themselves too and killing all that momentum. So I think a good start early and sustained effort throughout. It's the NCAA tournament. You're going to have a game of emotions. I think this is also a tournament where Cal's emotions have to be in check too. He can't lose himself on the sidelines, because when he does, his team does it too. Orlando Antigua gets paid more money to keep him out of trouble than he does anything else in the 40 minutes of a basketball game. Watch Coach O every time Cal gets animated. Like he's up there and then Cal tells him to sit down like half the time. Yep. It just stand there trying to stay in front of him. Like it's entertaining to watch. I want to see Cal also let the craziness go. Like if something happens, you're not changing it.
Right.
Don't let that one play and that momentum build into a second or third thing against you. Lock in and say, look, it's us against the world. If we take care of us, we're going to be okay. That's what I want the approach to be. Refuse to lose, not just from the guys on the floor, from the guys on the sideline as well.
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I thought I would be more down on this team leaving Nashville because it just felt like it's such a big step back as it was happening. But driving home from Nashville, I was like, man, it's all the same stuff. It's all the same, not staying engaged for a full 40 minutes. It's not fighting defensively. It's giving up momentum in the last 4 minutes of the first half and the first 4 of the second half. It's little things like that. It's like there wasn't anything structurally wrong with Kentucky. It's just another one of those like, damn, here it goes again. Exactly what has kind of killed Kentucky all year. Nothing absolutely glaring that made me go, well, this team doesn't have a shot. And I did like their response. It was kind of a mixed bag of emotions afterward in the locker room. Jacob Toppin saying all the right things. CJ Fredericks, trying to be the leader of the locker room and say, we can't let defensive lapses, turn into 3-4 minute stretches of a lack of engagement and things like that. They all said the right things, but I left feeling pretty positive after the fact going, it sucked. You wish that we had more than a couple days in Nashville, but this team has always been built for March. John Calipari said from day one that all of their efforts, and it's a lot of pressure to put on these kids to say everything boils down to this week. But if you're going to build toward March and say that all year long, then you got to put your money where your mouth is and build toward March and put everything out there this week.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you this because I think this is a fair question. What does this team have to do for the fans, and not just the fans? I think for us that cover the program on a daily basis, this is my 6th year on the beat. This is my 4th NCAA tournament that I'm going to cover in person. Obviously, the COVID year, the team didn't make it, and then the cancellation the year before. So 4th tournament since I've been on the beat 6 years. But this program's like in a completely different spot than what it was when I joined the beat. It's in a completely different spot from what it was when you joined the beat. So what do you think that the program has to do over the course of the next 3 weeks to kind of just right the ship and the momentum back in the right direction, to where if they don't win a national championship, and we're sitting here on Sources Say in mid-April, what needs to happen for us to have positive conversation about, okay, we're getting back on track here. We didn't win number 9. Maybe is it as a Final Four? Is it a run to the regional title game? Is it getting out of the first weekend, getting to the Sweet 16? Like, what needs to happen to build momentum onto what's coming next year? Now, can you catch lightning in a bottle and get to a Final Four and win a national championship? When you look at the number of seeds that have done it the last 10 years, most are ones. There was a 7 seed in UConn that did it, that beat Kentucky. Like, is this the year that a 6 seed does it? Like, what has to happen, Jack, for you personally, and then for the fans? And maybe the fans can tell us in the chat, what needs to happen? What would you be satisfied with that say, okay, I'm happy. Like this, I feel like we're getting somewhere now and building on what's coming in recruiting wise.
And I had this same argument on radio this past weekend, and there's still a lot of I'm sure we'll hear a lot of it in the chat. There's still a mindset of, well, okay, if Cal's going to build toward March all year long and say nothing matters leading up to that, then we had Final Four expectations going into the year. Then you need to make a Final Four. I'm not that far. I consider a successful year with this individual team, if they make it to the Sweet 16 and compete, and ideally Elite Eight. I look back at the De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk year, and I go, damn, that was a really, really good team. Elite Eight, they lost at the buzzer. Luke May, team that ended up winning the championship.
Yeah, probably a shot away from winning a national championship, really. because whoever won that game was probably winning the thing.
You take that. I don't know if I'm even that far, because Kentucky was a team that was clearly capable of winning a national championship, and they just got beat against a team that was just ever so slightly better, got the lucky shot at the very end. So I think if you can get to the Sweet 16 and fight, and it's a matchup situation, or comes like, they can't go to the Sweet 16 and get steamrolled to Marquette. That can't happen. They need to go in there. They need to compete and lose in an 83-82 game. That make me go, all right, they recovered well, but ideally you win that game, you get to the Elite Eight, and then whatever happens. I would feel very good about the trajectory of this team, how the rock bottom that they hit at Missouri and kind of around that time frame, their bounce back to get to that point. If they make it to the Elite Eight, I'm cool.
But if chalk holds, and you told Kentucky fans when the season started that they could play Providence, Kansas State, Marquette to get to the Elite Eight, what are fans saying?
You need to win those 3 games.
You need to win those 3 games. And Marquette's a program that Kentucky's not like seeing in postseason play over the course of history. So I think Elite Eight, I think Sweet 16 would be getting to the second. Honestly, if you want me to be honest, getting a win is the first step in the right direction. Get a win Friday. You have to do that one before we can talk about the other stuff. But after that, I think a first weekend exit just makes the noise louder.
Can't happen.
I think getting to the second weekend and playing competitively, like you said, gives fans some hope that it's trending in the right direction again and builds some momentum and gives you a taste of March. But if you get to the second weekend, then at least you had an opportunity to play your way into the final weekend. And I think having an opportunity to play your way to a Final Four, I think that's a scenario that you accept. It's like getting to a championship, or if you get to the final weekend, you're in the conversation. So I just want to be in the conversation for the final weekend, and then let's see what happens from there, because then it comes down to execution and who's playing better basketball.
And to their credit, as we said earlier in the show, Kentucky has always responded in this moment in particular, losing at home against South Carolina, going on a 4-game winning streak, losing at Georgia, going on a 4-game winning streak. Four wins gets you to the Final Four. So it sounds crazy, but if you're telling me that your path is Providence, Kansas State, Marquette, and Purdue, Duke, Tennessee, team that you've already beaten twice, I mean, you take that path. And if you get to that point, then all bets are off. Like, I still physically, the tools are there. As I've said all year long going into the year, no matter how bad things got, we use it against them, saying that this team is way too talented to struggle the way they were. But to their credit, when they are struggling, they also kind of get the benefit of the doubt in that regard, where you go, well, I know that Oscar Tshiebwe is capable of taking over a game. I know that Jacob Toppin is capable of taking over a game. Antonio Reeves, Cason Wallace, go down the list. We have the dudes on this team to make a run. It's just about playing cohesive for 4 games to get to a Final Four. Can they get to that point?
Do you give Michigan State any chance at all of that being a Kentucky-Michigan State battle in New York if that plays out? And if it does, how much confidence do you have that Kentucky could avenge its loss to them? And I know we're getting literally a week ahead, but Tom Izzo in March as a 7th seed, do you really think Marquette's sitting there happy that they could have to play Tom Izzo and Michigan State in the second round? Probably not. Like, I could see a scenario where Michigan State's in New York with Kentucky and Duke there, and it being a really exciting regional with teams that you usually see as a Final Four, or probably some Champions Classic like look to it.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Champions Madison Square Garden. Yeah.
Like I could see that being the way this goes. But I'll also say this: I think Oral Roberts is a trendy upset pick in that first round game.
Max Agnes.
They're efficient offensively. And what do I say about efficient offensive teams this time of year? I like efficient offensive teams, especially in a 1-game, lay it all on the line moment, where in this tournament, if you're making shots early, you give yourself a chance late. If you make shots early and guard play carries you, you have a chance. So I don't know. It's going to be a fun tournament. I don't know who Cinderella is this year. I don't know who St. Peter's is, but we know there's going to be one. There's always going to be a team that's going to pull an upset, make it to that Sweet 16. I think there's a lot of teams that could do it, but this is going to be a fun tournament. I don't look at this thing and go, there's a clear-cut champion. Like Alabama's getting a lot of attention. Cool. That's fine. Nate Oates still has to show me that he can do it when it matters most.
Mm-hmm.
So the league got 8 teams in. 8 teams, and you seed Texas A&M a 7. You seed Texas A&M a 7
Terrible.
in a league that got 8 teams in, and they finished second in the league. Like what? I don't understand. I do not understand at all. Like I think the league got a lot of respect, but I think the committee kind of threw a slap in the face with the way that they seeded some of these teams as well. Like I don't know, but guess what? Seeding doesn't matter. Just go play basketball. That's where we're at now.
Let's go play basketball. Let's hope our trip down. You just got approved for Greensboro. We're going down Thursday morning, I believe, to get down for the open practices and all that stuff. Last time we had an NCAA tournament show, it did not go very well, Shawn. So we're going to be watching our words very, very, very carefully this time around, depending on how that open practice goes. I'm probably going to say that Providence looks like world beaters in their shoot around the day before. And
I'm going to say Bryce Hopkins. I'm going to say Bryce Hopkins grew 2 inches overnight. That's what I'm going to say. Like, God, he's 6'10" now, 6'9". Like, just I'm saying nothing but positive things. I may even pick Providence to win on our pregame show on Friday, just to kind of. I don't want to remember what happened to us last year. Remember Tennessee fans coming in the lobby of the hotel and giving us hell, and then we had to watch them.
Sure do.
Yep, and then I don't remember that night. That was we were up till 4:30, just kind of drowning our sorrows and our pain, and I really don't want to do that again.
I don't need shooters. I need handle makers. Oh, what a night that was. Let's hope for a not a repeat of that. We definitely need some momentum. Cal said that this is all that matters. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt in this circumstance. New season, brand new season. Everybody in America is 0-0 right now. Let's roll.
And we need people, and we need people at our shows when we go live down there. Like we want some actual people sitting there with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think that'd be fun.
We'll be more of a head start. Give people an update on when we're going to be there instead of 5 minutes before it starts. Sitting down at the second floor lobby of the Omni and say, "Everybody, come find us." We'll definitely make it happen. So before we get out of here, one quick message from our friend Andy Ludecki. Today, we are welcoming a new sponsor to the Sources Say podcast, MyPerfectFranchise.net, and Andy Ludecki, a franchise consulting company that helps others find franchises that will fit their needs, skill sets, investment requirements, and time commitment restraints. Andy is a big college sports fan, husband, and father of 3 children. He says they're growing up way too fast. You might have seen Andy's name on KSR before as he sponsors some of our recruiting coverage. Andy's super nice, great to chat with, and we are really excited to continue our partnership. Andy is an experienced entrepreneur and has been helping others go through the same process that changed his life 10 plus years ago. If you are wanting to find out a way out of corporate America or a way to diversify, please reach out to Andy. He's got a ton of knowledge in this world. Best of all, his services are 100% free to you. As always, nothing ventured, nothing gained. You can learn more and contact Andy anytime at myperfectfranchise.net. Shawn, let's get out of here. Let's get down to Greensboro. Let's have a good time. And let's get a damn win in the NCAA tournament. It's about that time. Shawn, tell fans where they can find your work.
You can find my work at gobigbluecountry.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at GBBCountry.
Find me on Twitter as well, at Jack Pilgrim KSR. Reach out to me via email, jpilgrim@KentuckySportsRadio.com. With that, we'll be back next time for the Jam Packed Sources Say podcast. We will see you then.